Some deaths shock because they are both tragic and absurdly avoidable. A farmer crushed by his own loader, a teen swept away by a river for a bet, a mother falling into a hidden well. This video explores stories that remind us of how fragile life can be, even in ordinary moments. In Owerri, the bustling capital of Imo State, Nigeria, a young couple prepared to welcome a new life into their family. A child offers hope and joy, but when the time came for the baby to be born, what should have been a moment of celebration and relief spiraled into an unimaginable nightmare inside the walls of a hospital where trust and safety should have been guaranteed. Instead, a series of decisions and shocking negligence turned one of life's most sacred moments into a devastating tragedy. In 2025, the unnamed woman was admitted to Lebechi Hospital in labor. Her condition quickly became critical when she began to bleed heavily, a complication that required urgent medical intervention. Doctors determined that she needed an emergency cesarean section, a procedure meant to save both mother and child by delivering the baby surgically. Cesarean sections are complex but common operations, and in the hands of trained professionals, they often mean the difference between life and death for patients facing difficult deliveries. But at Lebechi Hospital that day, the procedure unfolded under circumstances that were both shocking and wholly unacceptable. According to the woman's husband, Onyekachi Eze, who was present throughout the ordeal, the doctors and medical staff appeared completely unprepared to handle the surgery. One of the doctors decided that as the situation grew dire, the expertise and skill of another doctor was needed. But shockingly, instead of relying on training or professional expertise, they turned to their phones for guidance. In full view of Onyekachi, the woman's husband, they opened a YouTube video and attempted to follow its instructions as they operated on the pregnant woman. The unimaginable scene was one of desperation and incompetence. Unqualified professionals performing a life-saving procedure by copying steps from an online tutorial. Despite the woman's critical state, the staff continued with this approach, demonstrating the dire lack of proper training and readiness within the facility. The outcome was catastrophic. Both the pregnant woman and her unborn baby lost their lives on the operating table. The procedure, meant to save them, became the direct cause of their deaths. For Onyekachi, who had arrived at the hospital with hope that his wife and child would be safely delivered, the experience was one of helpless horror. His testimony, later shared in a video by Nollywood producer Stanley Ontop, revealed to the public the shocking details of what had occurred inside Lebechi Hospital. The aftermath was swift and intense. News of the tragedy spread quickly, igniting outrage across Imo State and beyond. Questions were raised about how such a facility could operate without adequate oversight, and how individuals so unqualified were entrusted with lives. Law enforcement intervened soon after the case gained attention. The hospital owner was arrested and several nurses were detained as investigations began. Meanwhile, the doctors directly responsible for the botched procedure fled the scene and remain at large, prompting a search by authorities. The incident laid bare the grave dangers posed by medical negligence and unregulated healthcare practices. What happened at Lebechi Hospital was not simply a medical complication or unavoidable loss, but a wholly preventable death caused by recklessness and lack of professionalism. A young woman and her child died in an absurd and avoidable way, victims of malpractice that should never have occurred. The tragedy serves as a painful reminder of the devastating consequences when trust is broken in the very institutions meant to preserve life. In Thousand Oaks, California, a bright young student with a promising future stood on the edge of adulthood. Just 2 months away from graduation, 18-year-old Bernard Moon was admired for his academic talent, his athletic ability on the tennis court, and his determination to pursue engineering. He had been interviewed at prestigious universities, including Brown, was a competitor in science fairs, and had made clear his ambition to become an electrical engineer. By every measure, Bernard's life seemed to be moving toward success and opportunity. Yet in April 2016, a single mistake during what was supposed to be a simple school project experiment ended his life in the most sudden and absurd way possible. On the evening of April 5th, Bernard and a 17-year-old classmate went to Madrona Elementary School, a quiet campus with an open courtyard where they believed they could safely test their project. Their experiment, intended for an AP physics assignment, involved a homemade rocket built with improvised chemical fuel. Unlike standard bottle rockets, which are launched using pumps and controlled air pressure, their device relied on volatile chemicals that made the setup far more dangerous. Some reports indicated it had even been attached to a skateboard, designed not to fly vertically but to propel itself across the ground. What should have been an exciting trial of a high school project turned instantly catastrophic. While attempting to handle the rocket, Bernard reportedly tried to stabilize or initiate it manually. In that moment, the pressurized device exploded with enormous force, tearing apart the makeshift rocket and hurling fragments in every direction. The blast was so powerful that people attending a Girl Scout meeting nearby thought they had heard a rocket launcher. Parents, children, and a school janitor all rushed to the scene, where Bernard lay gravely injured. His classmate, though close to the device, escaped with only minor injuries. Emergency responders were called immediately. Nurses present at the meeting attempted CPR, desperately trying to control the severe bleeding and keep Bernard alive until help arrived. He was rushed to Los Robles Hospital, only blocks away from the school, but his injuries were too severe. Despite efforts to save him, Bernard died shortly after arrival. His friend was treated for lesser wounds and was expected to survive. The incident left investigators piecing together exactly what had gone wrong. The Ventura County Sheriff's Department confirmed that the rocket was homemade, not a store-bought hobby device, and that it used a dangerous chemical combination. The explosion was not sanctioned by either the elementary or high school, and it appeared the boys had chosen the empty schoolyard simply for its open space. Authorities called it a tragic accident, the result of an unsupervised experiment that disregarded basic safety protocols. Thousand Oaks High School announced that its hearts were broken, and counselors were made available to grieving students. The elementary school where the accident occurred closed temporarily, both for safety concerns and to allow for investigation. Social media was flooded with tributes. Classmates recalled his humor, his intelligence, and his determination. Friends noted that he had been accepted to both Brown University and the University of California, Berkeley, and many remembered him as a leader who inspired those around him. Parents who knew Bernard and his family described the loss as unthinkable, the abrupt end of a life filled with talent and promise. The aftermath underscored just how avoidable the tragedy had been. Bernard's future, shaped by years of effort and achievement, was cut short in seconds by an ill-considered decision to manually handle a dangerous experiment. Homemade rockets and improvised chemical reactions are inherently risky, requiring distance, protective equipment, and strict safety procedures. In ignoring those precautions, the experiment became deadly. Bernard's death was both absurd and heartbreaking. A brilliant young man, celebrated by peers and destined for higher education, lost his life in a way that should never have happened. It remains a sobering reminder of the dangers of underestimating experimental science and of how quickly promise and potential can be erased by one moment of misjudgment. On the afternoon of June 4, 2017, 70-year-old Derek Mead, a respected multimillionaire farmer and property developer from Somerset, was engaged in one of his favorite pastimes, tending to his land and building a rockery near a large pond on his estate. Derek, a man with decades of experience in farming and business, was known for his meticulous approach to his work, his love of animals, and his lifelong connection to the Somerset countryside. His family had been farming in the region for generations, and Derek himself managed thousands of acres, owned racehorses, and served as chairman of Puxton Park and the Sedgemoor Auction Center. Yet on this sunny afternoon, in the familiar surroundings of his home at the Laurels in Puxton, a momentary lapse in caution would lead to a shockingly absurd and fatal accident. Derek had parked his JCB farm loader nearby with the engine running while he focused on arranging rocks for the new garden feature. Inside the cab sat his small Jack Russell Terrier, left there presumably for company while Derek worked nearby. The farmer had left the machine in neutral and without the handbrake fully engaged, believing it would remain stationary. The situation appeared ordinary, but the positioning of the dog in the cab proved to be critical. At some point, the Terrier jumped or placed its paws on the controls, accidentally striking the direction shuttle lever, a device remarkably easy to move, comparable to the indicator stalk in a car, which controlled the loader's forward and backward motion. As Derek crouched near the machine, perhaps inspecting the rockery or preparing to open a gate, the loader lurched forward. Witnesses and investigators later surmised that Derek, realizing the machine was moving, instinctively ducked, but the force of the vehicle immediately trapped him against a solid gate. Son Alistair, who arrived on the scene soon after, found his father unresponsive, pinned by the loader. Paramedics rushed to the farm, accompanied by emergency response vehicles, including an air ambulance, and attempted to free Derek and stabilize him. Despite their efforts, he suffered spinal fractures and traumatic asphyxia and was pronounced dead at the scene. The post-mortem examination confirmed that the combination of crushing injuries and asphyxia had been instantaneous and fatal. The investigation revealed a sequence of preventable missteps. Derek, despite his extensive experience operating farm machinery, had left the loader unattended with the engine running, neglected to secure the handbrake, and allowed a small pet to remain in the cab. Each of these choices, individually risky, combined in a tragically improbable way. Simon Chilcott of the Health and Safety Executive detailed how the dog's movement on the lever caused the vehicle to move forward without acceleration, striking Derek before he could react. Assistant Coroner Dr. Peter Harrowing concluded at the inquest that Derek's death was a very tragic accident and that the most likely explanation was the inadvertent movement of the shuttle lever by the dog. The aftermath of Derek's death deeply affected his family and the local farming community. The loss was particularly devastating for his son, who discovered his father trapped and unresponsive, and for a family whose history in Somerset farming stretched back centuries. Neighbors and associates described Derek as a man who had been doing what he loved at the time of his death, a figure dedicated to the land, his animals, and his businesses. The inquest underscored not only the shock of the accident, but also the absurdity of its cause, a combination of a small dog, a running machine, and an unengaged safety lever. Even for a man as experienced and capable as Derek, a fleeting lapse in caution led to an instantly fatal and entirely avoidable outcome. A lifetime of expertise could not prevent the sudden fatal chain of events set in motion by an everyday pet in an ordinary moment. For a man who had cultivated land, businesses, and a family legacy, the abruptness and preventability of his death were both tragic and profoundly shocking. On a monsoon-soaked day in 2025, 19-year-old Maud Junaid, a resident of Niwata village in Uttar Pradesh, India, spent the afternoon with friends along the banks of the Yamuna River. Described by locals as lively and eager to impress his peers, Junaid was drawn to the thrill of dares and social attention, often engaging in risky stunts for amusement. That afternoon, the swollen river, swollen by continuous rain and surging with turbulent currents, seemed to offer the perfect stage for a challenge. The seemingly harmless bet, worth roughly £4, would soon take a deadly turn, highlighting the perils of impulsive behavior in dangerous environments. Junaid and his friends were perched near a bridge that spanned the churning river. Witnesses reported that without hesitation, Junaid climbed the railings at the edge of the structure, the murky water rushing violently just a few feet below. Video captured by bystanders showed him wearing a white vest and blue jeans, bracing himself before leaping into the torrent. Cheers from his friends, some filming the event on mobile phones, made it seem like the dare was harmless, yet the reality of the situation was far from benign. Upon hitting the water, Junaid resurfaced briefly, attempting to swim back toward the riverbank. The current, however, was far stronger than he could have anticipated. Spectators observed him thrashing against the relentless flow, his movements growing more desperate as exhaustion set in. The torrent dragged him downstream with alarming speed, and despite frantic attempts to regain footing, Junaid vanished beneath the surface. Emergency services, including local police, divers, and personnel from the State Disaster Response Force, launched an immediate search, but the combination of swollen waters and treacherous conditions hampered all recovery efforts. Officials confirmed that despite sustained operations, he could not be located. The circumstances surrounding Junaid's death drew attention not only for the river's dangerous conditions, but also for the role of peer pressure and social encouragement. Investigators later confirmed that a case would be filed against friends who encouraged and filmed the fatal leap. Officials emphasized the seriousness of promoting or recording such reckless stunts, warning that negligence of this kind would not be tolerated. For the community of Niwata, the loss was deeply unsettling. Residents expressed outrage over the preventable nature of the accident and urged authorities to strengthen safety measures along the riverbanks, particularly during the monsoon season when currents are strongest. Families of young people in the area viewed the tragedy as a cautionary tale, a moment of impulsive daring, made stronger by peer approval and the lure of social media, had transformed a simple challenge into a fatal event. The aftermath was marked by grief, reflection, and calls for vigilance. What began as a small wager, a bet of a few pounds, escalated into a catastrophe that could have been entirely avoided. His attempt to impress friends and entertain onlookers ended with a young life cut short, a haunting reminder of how tragedy doesn't spare anyone, not even the young. In a river swollen by monsoon rains, a brief impulsive leap became a fatal misjudgment, leaving a community to mourn a preventable loss. On the morning of March 29, 2025, 67-year-old Shirley Obert, a devoted mother of 4 from Monroe County, Georgia, set out on what should have been an ordinary day. Known to friends and family as a kind and caring woman, Shirley balanced her work at Chick-fil-A with raising her children and supporting her husband Mike as the family's sole provider. Her life was marked by devotion and routine, yet that morning, a combination of chance and hidden danger would transform an ordinary drive into a sequence of events both shocking and tragically avoidable. Shirley was driving her Mazda Miata along a rural stretch near Oxford and Abercrombie roads, just outside Atlanta, when her car veered off the road. Authorities have not determined why the vehicle left the pavement. Possibilities include avoiding an animal or a momentary lapse in attention. But whatever the cause, the crash left Shirley shaken. Remarkably, she survived the initial impact, emerging from the vehicle alive, seemingly intending to seek help or move to a safer area. Dressed in her Chick-fil-A uniform, she attempted to navigate the surrounding woodland, unaware of the hidden hazards that lay in wait. The terrain surrounding her car was dense with undergrowth, thick brush concealing the dangers beneath. Among these unseen threats was a deep well, hidden entirely by the foliage. As Shirley moved through the obscured landscape, she stepped directly into the well, plummeting to her death. Rescue teams later described the depth of the structure and the concealment provided by the brush as making it nearly invisible from above. In the brief moments between surviving the crash and encountering this hidden pit, Shirley's life was extinguished in a shockingly preventable accident, leaving witnesses and rescuers grappling with the cruel irony of her fate. Emergency services mobilized immediately after her disappearance. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office issued alerts for local residents to be on the lookout, while the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, the Georgia State Patrol Aviation Unit, Monroe County Fire Department, Macon-Bibb County Fire Department, and Forsyth Police Department all joined in a multi-agency search. Despite tireless efforts that spanned hours and extended into the following day, Shirley could not be located until the morning of March 30th, when her body was discovered at 11:30 a.m. at the bottom of the concealed well. The sheriff's office confirmed that there was no foul play involved, emphasizing that Shirley had been attempting to reach help when the tragic accident occurred. Friends and family mourned not only the sudden loss of a beloved mother, wife, and colleague, but also the sheer randomness of the accident. Social media posts and GoFundMe campaigns reflected the disbelief and grief of those who knew her, highlighting her warmth, generosity, and the devotion she showed to her loved ones. As a devoted Christian and friend to many, Shirley's passing left an emotional void for her husband, 4 sons, and close-knit circle of friends, compounded by the knowledge that her death was both absurd and preventable. Surviving a violent car crash, only to fall into an unseen well moments later, illustrates the cruel twists of fate that can confront even the most careful individuals.